Have you ever walked into a bookstore, saw a book, you picked it up because you thought it was interesting, and then you read it and it kind of alters the way you think about certain things? I recently had such an experience and I wanted to share about that book here. The book that I'm talking about is called The Employees by Olga Ravin. The tag is a workplace novel of the 22nd century. That's what is written at the front of the book. Let me just read you a little bit about what the book is. Okay, so it is set on a ship. It is a 6,000. It's called the 6,000 ship, and apparently things have started to change. Like it has started to feel a little different, and as you read, what you understand is that the ship contains of both humans and humanoids. But there is an incident that has happened on the ship, which is why the board of directors are trying to find out and trying to understand what really is going on. There's a commission that is being set up trying to understand what really is happening on the ship. And the way the book is written, it is statements from employees. None of the statements are longer than, I think the longest statement is 2 pages or something, but otherwise everything is very short. Like some of the statements are just 1 line or 2 lines as long. And when you start reading the book, right, it feels a bit confusing, to be honest. Like it takes a little bit of time to get into what really is happening, to try and understand at least or even to begin to understand what really is happening. I don't think even after you've read the book, you would really understand exactly what's happening in the book. But there are as you read the book, and you can see that, for such a small book, I have so much of annotations here because there were statements that were thrown into the space, like when you're reading it, which just gets stuck in your brain. It forces you to think about certain things in a certain way. Like, let me pick up one of the statements that I really like, right? So there's this one statement where this person is asking about, if anybody is going to remember the people on the ship. As in, when you read the statements, you don't know if you're talking to a human or a humanoid. Only when you read it, and maybe as you get into it, is when you would understand that probably there are signs that, okay, this is not a human talking, this is a humanoid talking instead. So here it says, I want to be a good employee. I want to make good choices. But how can I tell if I'm following the program correctly? Some actions can have consequences that won't become apparent until a time so far off that I can't begin to grasp. Am I supposed to carry on my job knowing that what I'm doing potentially works against the system or the program? Or am I so pervaded by the program that I'm bound to act in accordance no matter what? Am I the program's hand? Still, update errors do occur. We all know it. It can't be in the program's interest. If I carry out an action that, unbeknown to me, is counteractive to the program's momentum, I can do nothing but hate myself for it. I have no way of knowing whether an action in any given instance is anti-programmatic. How am I to know if I'm to hate myself or not? Should I hate myself anyway? Where can I get an overview of what actions run contrary to the will of the programming? Who do I go to for forgiveness? And then there's a question about what counts as bad? Do you need to act out for something to be bad, or does a thought count as bad? If you start thinking that the program is not infallible, does that make you bad? If you start feeling like that, does it mean that there is something wrong with you, or there is something actually wrong with the program? How do I understand the difference between the two? Then there is a question about what productivity means. How can I be productive if I'm not able to understand the way I'm thinking, and if I'm having these kind of thoughts, how is that productive? And there's a question about what productivity really means. And then there's one part of this section that I really like, and this is a different statement, but where it says, there's more to a person than the work they do. A person is more than just their work. But what else could a person be? Where would your food come from? Who would keep you company? How would you get by without work and without your co-worker? So like I said, there's so many of these questions that come up, and they don't really resolve any of these questions. There are no answers given to this. It is just a one-sided interview where it is just the commission recording the statements of employees, like recording their thoughts. It is such a deep book for such a small book. It kind of makes you think about identity. It kind of makes you think about, what is really your purpose? What is your meaning? And I had like written down a few of the questions that I had, right? So on purpose and meaning, like what makes us human versus non-human. So there's a part in the book where a humanoid tries to understand how can he or they become a human. Can they be counted as a human? What makes them different from a human? So there's this whole monologue where they try to understand what makes a human and what makes them a non-human. And then about memories and feelings. So what happened, the incident that happens on the ship, or whatever is going on in the ship, it suddenly starts triggering memories and feelings which the crew has been devoid of for some time. But suddenly they're starting to have memories of Earth, of feeling, of wanting. And there is this question about, can you really remember something that you were never a part of? So there are humanoids in the book which start feeling these feelings, right? They start having memories of a home that they've never been a part of. And then the question is, where does that memory come from? How are they able to form these memories? What is how important is your memory in making you who you are? Right. Then there's obviously the workplace culture, like of authority, of loyalty, of agreement with central ideas. Like this portion that I just read, I think is a perfect example of what that workplace culture looks like, because obviously when we are working, we're all like in offices and everything, and there's so much of compliance that is required. And this is not just in the context of the workplace, right? It's in the larger society, in families, everywhere where the idea of loyalty, what does loyalty really mean, and how you need to agree with central ideas. Do you need to agree with central ideas? Where does dissent fall? Like if you dissent with a central idea, where do you fall as a person? So there's so many of these questions also that actually comes up as you read the book. There's a part of the book where humanoids start calling out the hypocrisy of humans. So because of the way the humanoids are programmed, they have a certain way of functioning, right? And the hypocrisy of morality and ethics, and the relationship between humans and what they made. And then there's a very interesting question of choice and free will and morality and consequences. So the question about, if there is this whole idea of morality and consequences, are you really free? Do you have free will the way you think you do? If there is good and bad, and what is the duality of the good and bad and the right and the wrong? And who decides what is good and bad and what is right and wrong? So there are so many of these questions that get asked in this book. So yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed reading this book. It's been weeks since I finished reading this. I was just not ready to come on camera and talk about it because I didn't really know if I could do justice to this. I don't think I'm still doing justice to the book as such, but it was such an interesting read. It really did influence the way I think about certain things, the way I perceive certain things. And it was a deeply philosophical experience for me to read this book. So if you are looking for something that is really deep, that is really philosophical, and that kind of challenges the way you think, I would definitely recommend that you pick up The Employees by Olga Ravin.